What is going on, everybody? The Detroit Lions have been building this thing up the right way, brick by brick, last year into the NFC Championship, and this year looking to get over that final hurdle and legitimately win a Super Bowl in Detroit here this year. Just how far we've come with the Detroit Lions, as they are my number 2 ranked team in this deep dive series heading into the 2024 NFL season. Going to be a really fun one, and we have just one more day here to get the Chiefs deep dive done as well, who obviously come in with the number 1 spot. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it, talking about this team's offseason, starting with the coaching staff. No movement here, but you better believe champagne bottles were being popped all throughout the Motor City when Ben Johnson gets on the phone, tells the Washington Commanders, turn that plane back around. I'm not interviewing with you. I'm not interviewing with nobody. I'm coming back to get a Super Bowl for the Detroit Lions. Maybe, just maybe, the most significant off-season change / move / retention that happened for any team. A huge deal to be able to keep Ben Johnson on staff as the offensive coordinator here. But as you look at his roster, really no movement at all. Quarterback, nada. Running back, nada. Tight end, the Niners tried to pry their favorite tight end to Brock Wright away from them. They said, no, we're keeping him. But at wide receiver, they are letting Josh Reynolds go. He was solid for them. It's nothing I'm too worried about, but it does certainly open up at least some minor questions in terms of their perimeter ball winners there, especially when all they really did was bring in the injury-prone Tim Patrick from Denver, who's currently on their practice squad. I think will be on the 53 before too long, and an undersized, really slot wide receiver as an undrafted free agent in Isaiah Williams. So I do say slightly downgraded at wide receiver. But then on the offensive line, I say slightly upgraded. They let Jonah Jackson go, who gets an absolute bag from the LA Rams, but he never took that step as a pass protector here in Detroit. And they go get the 34-year-old Kevin Zeitler, who still absolutely has it. So much so that I actually think he's a better player than Jonah Jackson. And then they also spent a 4th-round pick on the very fascinating developmental international Giovanni Manu. But obviously, they're happy with the state of this offense. This is about as close to no change as you will see for any team's offseason on one side of the ball. But then defensively, they did definitely shuffle the deck. They're still trying to get there on this side of the ball. They're hoping this offseason can be that kind of last hurdle here. Really changes at every position except for linebackers. So on the interior of the defensive line, they do let a couple of rotational players in Benito Jones and Isaiah Buggs go. But more notably, they're losing kind of hybrid end John Kaminsky for what looks like the majority of this season. They are hoping that he can return maybe in December or into the playoffs. That's going to be tough. So that is a loss. But they add DJ Reader in free agency. As if this team didn't have an intimidation factor enough about them. They go and get one of the best true 3-down nose tackles in the National Football League, which is very exciting, even if he was available due to some potential injury concerns on him. And then they also spent a 6th-round pick on the athletic Mekhi Wingo out of LSU. So I do say upgraded on the interior of the defensive line, even with losing John Kaminsky for the majority of this season. DJ Reader is an excellent addition for this staff. And then on the edge, I'm going to say upgraded health permitting. They signed Marcus Davenport, who was available very much on the cheap because of his durability concerns really throughout his career that plagued him in Minnesota yet again last year. And they get James Houston back, who only played 3% of their snaps in his sophomore season. You pair that with just losing Charles Harris, who only played a quarter of their snaps, Romeo Okwara, a third of their snaps. They don't even have to get full seasons from Davenport and Houston to get more from this group than Harris and Okwara. But it might be more of a slightly upgraded or even a neutral, depending on how the health lands there. But I will say upgraded because those guys are healthy right now. At linebacker, it's a very deep group, staying neutral. They did technically add Ben Neiman, but who cares? At cornerback, This is going to be one of those position groups that gets that purple-coated, massively upgraded. Few units in the NFL are looking more upgraded than the Detroit Lions cornerback room. They do lose Cameron Sutton, who played 99% of this team's snaps, and Jerry Jacobs, who played 58% of their snaps, but massive additions, including trading their third-round pick for Carlton Davis, spending their first-round pick on Terrion Arnold, and spending their second-round pick on Ennis Rakestraw. Boy, do you think that front office thought they had a cornerback problem? They even bring in Amik Robertson from the Raiders, so massive upgrades to a very new-look secondary. With that said, though, they are losing some pieces at safety in that secondary that aren't necessarily getting replaced here. Tracy Walker did play 41%. Had definitely had a falling out here in Detroit, though, and they let Chauncey Gardner-Johnson leave for the Eagles in free agency after he, only played a quarter of their games last year. Certainly not losses I'm going to panic about here, but again, really not doing anything to replace those guys. Undrafted free agent Lauren Strickland and more of a safety role projection now for Brian Branch. We'll definitely talk more about that when we get to the roster breakdown portion with the secondary, but I do say slightly downgraded at safety. I don't know how you couldn't. So just one position group with the defense with less on paper than they did have last year. And then with the special teams, this would probably be neutral, but their kicker, Michael Badgley, did go down for the season, and they're replacing him with the very much unproven Jake Bates. So I am going to say slightly downgraded for the special teams. Overall, though, a very good offseason. I love that they just kind of had built this roster up to a point where they had just a few holes left, being some pieces on that D-line and the secondary, and they really attacked those position groups and were able to mostly leave the rest of the team alone. They were so close last year and are just looking to get over the hump, and I really like what they did. Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and this entire front office has really done such an exceptional job since coming in here in 2021. But that does take me to the coaching breakdown here. Such a fun, cool, special coaching staff here. It starts at the top with Dan Campbell, who I now have ranked as my 6th overall head coach. And he's really kind of alone with maybe the Harbaughs in the league right now, where he's definitely more of just an overall CEO type of coach. He does come from an offensive background, and I'm sure he's very involved with Ben Johnson. And if you asked me kind of before this all started, what would a Dan Campbell offense look like? I think this offense has very much been in his vision, but he, for the most part, is pretty hands-off, just kind of lets Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn do their thing, run things on that side of the ball. And I think that allows Dan Campbell to impact this team with what he does best. And to me, that is his leadership and really his EQ, his emotional intelligence. And as you'll see here, the Detroit Lions come in a tier of their own with the highest ranking overall coach and culture grade. And there are teams in the league that have amazing cultures, right? And I don't want to dismiss those teams that have set a standard, that know how to win and have earned that benefit of the doubt. That stuff really matters, but it is just a little different here in Detroit. And it's been really fun to see this come full circle, because you go back to when Dan Campbell took this job, his opening press conference went viral for basically being a meme, where he's comes out and, he's this old school mentality talking about biting kneecaps off. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, look at this meathead football coach. Doesn't he know it's a passing league? This is never going to work. These guys are not going to buy into this. It was an entertaining press conference, but I don't think anybody could really have imagined that he would see it through to this degree, where that kneecap biting mentality doesn't necessarily mean like they don't want to throw the ball or that they aren't going to do modernized things like going for it on 4th down or being a, progressive football organization in that way. But the kneecap biting absolutely shows up in this sort of hive mind mentality that this team has, that Dan Campbell has built here. And yes, on the football field, they are incredibly physical, and they are the ass kickers of the NFL on the football field. I'm not trying to say there isn't a football side to that mentality. But I think it goes so much deeper than that with Detroit. I mentioned Dan Campbell's emotional intelligence. I really think him with Brad Holmes, who deserves credit for this as well, they have gone out to identify and bring in a specific type of person with every football player on this team. They are looking for those like-minded, blue-collar, scrappy dudes that are going to buy into this culture, help permeate the culture, and thrive in a locker room with this sort of overall kneecap-biting mentality. So they bring these guys in, and then Dan Campbell does what he does best, to lead by example, to help build that culture himself, whether that's doing push-ups with the team when they screw up, or, showing up at 3 a.m. with 6 quadruple espresso coffees or whatever he drinks from Starbucks, or, wearing a Brock Wright jersey in the war room on draft day after the Niners tried to pry him away, like understanding that the players in the locker room love that dude, crying after a tough loss because he cares so much. His impact on this football team, for not really being like an X's and O's guy, it is so incredible and enjoyable. And you got to say, this dude is not just one of the best coaches in the league. Again, I rank him 6th in the league for head coaches, but one of the easiest dudes to cheer for. So there's your head coach. But as we mentioned, he kind of lets these coordinators do their thing. So we aren't near done with this conversation. You've got Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator. Back-to-back years now where he's basically told the rest of the NFL to fuck off. I'm staying in Detroit. And I think that circles back to Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell has built this culture where guys want to be here. And that includes Ben Johnson coming back to really see this thing through. We'll see if they do win the Super Bowl, or if they fall short again, if he does this for a 3rd year, because there are teams chomping at the bit to get a little Ben Johnson, who is genuinely one of the elite offensive minds in the league right now. And what's really cool about Ben Johnson is he's not copying the Shanahan system, or he's not an Andy Reid disciple. If you look around the league, almost every scheme in the league is somewhere deriving from those 2 branches. Ben Johnson has kind of done this in his own way. He's built this pro-style, Dan Campbell-inspired offense that I would argue doesn't even really have like a schematic identity. It really taps into a little bit of everything. And then another thing he puts on top of a just very multiple balanced offense is there's nobody in the league, I mean, maybe Andy Reid, as good at pushing those gimmick buttons at the right time. And it's not always a trick play, though those are in there, whether it's a double pass or whatever that might be. But just little random creative wrinkles, experimenting with new formations, pre-snap motion, getting the ball in different guys' hands in different types of ways. Ben Johnson just has this rare ability to know exactly what button to press and when to press it. And, every maybe month or 3 weeks, you get kind of a back-breaking sort of gimmick or trick play from Ben Johnson that is just like, oh, he did it again. And I think that kind of trait is reflected in his overall just kind of game management, overall knowing what button to press, the run-pass balance, when play action is necessary. Like, he's just all around such a remarkable play caller. And by the way, there's not a more dangerous team in the league right now in terms of like utilizing 4th down. And Ben Johnson is so good, like knowing that they're going to have the freedom to go for it on 4th down pretty much from anywhere on the field. And he's got plays that are set up to get them 8 or 9 yards on a 3rd and 11 that are just super easy buttons for this offense, whether it's a halfback draw or a screen or a passing concept that he knows, that the defense is going to allow it. And just give Goff a super easy read saying, hey, get 8 or 9 yards here, and maybe Laporta or St. Brown will break a tackle and get us that 1st down anyway. But setting things up with a plan to then go for it on 4th down, where he does break out all these crazy trick plays and is so good at drawing up like have to have it plays. He's just really, really special, man. So he is genuinely one of the best overall assets that the Detroit Lions have. And Lions fans, count your blessings that he came back, because I can promise you the Lions would not rank number 2 in this power rankings without Ben Johnson. And in terms of the rankings, by the way, obviously very high, tied for first in pass game coaching. I really do think that highly of Ben Johnson, and second to third for run game coaching. So the balance of how great he is reflected there in both phases of the offense. Then as you look at the defensive coaching, I'm not going to quite be glowing as much about Aaron Glenn. I like Aaron Glenn. He's getting head coach interviews. The league really likes him. I think he's done a pretty good job with a defense that in his tenure here in Detroit has definitely had a lack of talent in a lot of different spots, and especially from a run defense standpoint. Now, part of that is this kneecap biting mentality that Dan Campbell has established just helps this team defend the run because they want it more than anybody. But I do think from a schematic point of view too, like not being afraid to get into base defense, mixing up their fronts, calling the right types of fronts against, different opponents, knowing what types of run schemes their opponent likes, what types of, fronts work against those schemes. They've done a good job at being very adaptable up front to help stop the run. And I actually do have the Lions at large tied for first in run defense coaching, which I suppose shouldn't be a huge surprise because the Lions did have the best run defense in the league last year. And I would just say Aaron Glenn shares credit for why they're so good on that side of the ball. But from a pass defense coaching, they still haven't really gotten this to work. Aaron Glenn comes from that Saints background, the Dennis Allen background, where they want to play that bump and run physical man-to-man defense. The thing is, they just haven't had the corners to do that. They're hoping this year that's going to finally change, and we can really see Aaron Glenn's true identity come through, and maybe this is the year he gets that head coaching offer from someone else. But I don't necessarily think the pass game coaching has been anything really special here. I'm not going to say it's been bad. They're in that very solid ranking there, B- grade, which is 22nd to 28th in a league loaded with really good defensive coaching. But I don't know that they've necessarily been able to pivot and develop this really complex zone heavy defense or gotten amazing as a blitzing defense. They just haven't really been all that good in terms of pass defense, but things did get better down the stretch last year for a defense that had a million moving pieces in the secondary. So again, not that Aaron Glenn has done a bad job in that phase, but definitely a year where they have a lot to prove in terms of can they get this pass defense up to snuff. Ultimately, you have a top 6 head coach and 2 coordinators getting head coach offers, one of which in Ben Johnson, that any given offseason could be the prize acquisition of an NFL organization. And this is a staff that obviously contributes heavily to the Lions ranking as high as they do here in this series. But let's transition to the roster breakdown and talk about this quarterback room with Jared Goff. And 3 years ago when the Lions acquired Jared Goff, he was a beat up, abandoned, stray dog that was a throw-in in the Matthew Stafford trade. And you go back to what I said in that, let's see, that would have been, the 2021 Lions deep dive. I was talking about how, I'm kind of interested to see how things go here because I felt like Jared Goff, not that I question his work ethic necessarily, but I pointed out that all the great quarterbacks in the league for the most part at some point have gone through pretty major adversity. And when it came to Goff, he had a rough rookie season. But for the most part, California cool, golden arm, number 1 overall pick, got to throw in Sean McVay's offense. For the most part, had never really been truly pushed and sent to that breaking point. And I don't think there could have been a better thing for Jared Goff than to get just thrown to Detroit in a complete rebuild. And the reason this really fascinated me is if you're going to be a great NFL quarterback when you're that pocket passer type that doesn't have mobility as Jared Goff doesn't, you have to be like a film sicko. You have to put in the extra hours, first one in, last one out, constantly grinding the tape and getting better every single day so that you can be one of the 5 or so best, most elite processing and decision-making quarterbacks in the league. And with the Rams, and really in his first year with Detroit, he just wasn't that. But I do think we have now seen Jared Goff 2.0 that is definitely reached that level at this point. And his ability to constantly make the right read on time, throw with anticipation within the structure of this offense, that processing and decision making have given him elite command of this Lions offense and give him a trait at the quarterback position that just not too many quarterbacks in the league have. And for a long time, I doubted that the Lions were going to kind of take this type of leap forward as a football team. Like, I thought they should have gone after Anthony Richardson and made a move up in that draft. Don't act like Jared Goff is the future of this team. And my opinion on that has changed. You know, for 2 years now, really, or at least the second half of the 2022 season and throughout last year, I've been just waiting for the old Jared Goof to show up. That inconsistent decision maker that has 2 good games and then lays a stinker. I just assumed that guy was going to come back at some point, but at this point, I don't think that's going to happen, and I'm certainly not betting on that to happen. And there has really not been a more consistent week-to-week quarterback than Jared Goff over the last 25 games or so, going back to when things really clicked, I would say, in the middle of that 2022 season, almost exactly halfway through this rebuild, if you look at it that way. And with that, for the first time ever, I have Jared Goff as a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. He is the future of the Detroit Lions. He's only 30 years old, which is crazy because he's been in the league forever, seemingly. But he has a whole nother career ahead of him here in Detroit. And he is absolutely at that level where I can say the Lions can win a Super Bowl with Jared Goff. And I even debated putting the up arrow on him to say that he can even get better. We'll see. As I'll talk about in just a second, he does have his limitations, and I don't know just how much better his processing and decision-making can get because it's already reached a very high level. But I will say this, we have those quarterback tiers, and right now Goff is in the tier 3 of really good quarterbacks that, you know, as long as you give him a good team, that's a quarterback that you can win a Super Bowl with. Tier 2 is more of like, this guy is legitimately elevating the team and is someone that you frankly expect to win a Super Bowl with in a 10-year window. I think Jared Goff, in a way that I never really expected, is pushing that tier 2. And I don't know exactly what it's going to take for me to put him in that tier. Maybe it is just doing what he's doing, another year, winning a Super Bowl in Detroit, playing great in the playoffs again. Maybe it is improving some of these weaknesses we're going to talk about on him in a second. But I will say, Lions fans, like, I'm not ruling that out. And my perspective on like quarterback growth and what is upside at the quarterback position, it has really changed the more and more football I watch. And the concept of a 30-year-old pocket passing quarterback continuing to get better into his 30s is certainly something I'm open to, because we've now seen it with Kirk Cousins, with Matthew Stafford. I think is playing the best ball of his career. At the end of the day, this is the number one thing that matters for these quarterbacks, and continuing to get those reps, to continue to see every coverage you could possibly see, to have all the answers for the test, and have that memory bank of information to go to in critical situations. That's something that can only come with playing 10,000 snaps in the league, which Jared Goff is approaching. Now, that is not to say Jared Goff doesn't have his shortcomings, right? Like, as with really any immobile quarterback, he's not a guy that's going to buy time for open throws with his feet very well. So you have to buy that time for him, metaphorically or on the football field with the offensive line, but literally buy it for him by spending money and investing in the offensive line and creating the sort of system and infrastructure that needs to exist for a guy like Jared Goff to play at the level he's playing at right now doesn't come cheap. And it's not easy to do that, right? Offensive line is hard to hit on. It's hard to develop. They get expensive quickly. But the Lions have absolutely put a good offensive line here in front of Jared Goff, as you guys know, and as we'll see in a little bit here in this video. But on top of that, even if you give him a great offensive line, and maybe a reason I don't have the up arrow on Jared Goff is one thing that all of the kind of game's elite pocket passing guys over the years have had, maybe, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, one thing they've all had, even though they're not mobile and athletic, is they have had elite pocket presence. And you can still buy time for open throws inside the pocket. If you have that feel for the rush, knowing how to mitigate pressure and manage the pocket, use your feet within the pocket to buy time for those throws. That sort of eye in the back of your head type of supernatural trait that these elite quarterbacks have. Jared Goff does not have that. And not only does that kind of reduce his ability to extend plays within the pocket, but it also hurts his ability under pressure. And that is Jared Goff's Achilles heel. It always has been, and it still is. And Jared Goff's efficiency when you can pressure him is still very bad. So he was 22nd in the NFL in passing grade under pressure last year. Not terrible, but nowhere close to top 10 as he is as an overall quarterback. But 39th in big-time throw percentage when pressured. So there were 6 backups in the league that made more big plays, big throws when pressure got in. 35th in turnover-worthy play percentage, so that's strip sacks coming in, bad throws into harm's way, and 32nd in quarterback rating. So he's effectively a backup quarterback when he gets pressured. And that's what the Rams were trying to get out of when they went to go get Matthew Stafford, who's near the top in all of those categories. So if you do want to slow down Jared Goff, he does have a very clear weakness and a way to get to him. And that's not necessarily like just blitzing him, because he does have a good processor. He can beat the blitz. But if you can beat him with 4, you're probably going to beat the Lions. And the Lions know that. That's why they've built the best offensive line in the league, right? But on the flip side of that, Jared Goff, when kept clean, is just about the best freaking quarterback in the league last year, at least. He was 2nd in PFF passing grade when kept clean, 23rd in big time throw percentage. So not necessarily making those like high leverage, huge throws, but 2nd in turnover worthy play percentage. So not putting the ball in harm's way, and 3rd in quarterback rating. And that to me is a total testament to what we talked about with his processing, his decision making, his command of the offense, and ultimately why he is a top 10 quarterback in the league for me right now. So Jared Goff has absolutely checked every box that I need to see for me to at least say he is a good enough quarterback to have real hopes that this Lions team can win the Super Bowl. But let's move forward and talk about the rest of the team and see if they can check those boxes as well. I will touch on the backup quarterback real quick, though. Hendon Hooker, 3rd-round pick last year. This is effectively his rookie season. He was coming off the ACL injury when they drafted him. I really wasn't the biggest Hendon Hooker fan, and frankly, I was pretty critical of this pick. He could theoretically turn into a decent backup, but even that, we still have yet to see it. Quarterbacks coming out of that Tennessee system are really hard to judge. He had been in college football for so long, and they ran 15 plays in that Tennessee offense. He does throw a nice football, though. He's got some athleticism. I'm not trying to write him off. I think he can still be a good backup. I just always felt like they could have better utilized that 3rd-round pick. I was largely wrong about my criticism of that Lions draft class, but I will stand my ground on my Hendon Hooker take. I think they could have added a wide receiver 2 or maybe a corner or something else that would be able to help this team a little bit more. Because it's not like he was some super high upside young dude that maybe could someday turn into the heir apparent to Jared Goff, right? That's just not who Hooker was as a prospect. But let's move on and talk about the weapons here. This isn't like the deepest or even like most traditional group of weapons in the league, but they've crafted this with a plan. They have some really good players that they have put in a position that they can basically funnel and design this offense through, everybody with their own kind of role within this offense. And that all pivots around Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I will say this, there is not a group of weapons in the league that is more dependent on one player staying healthy. I would be surprised if St. Brown does not lead the league in targets this year. And the way that he fits the design of this offense, fits Jared Goff's skill set, just destroying defenses with these anticipation throws in the intermediate of the field. it's just been a match made in heaven here. But he's so good, man. And there's just a variety of ways that the Lions have kind of changed the way I think about certain things. I never really felt like I would say a true slot wide receiver is one of the 10 best receivers in the league, in a league where there are some stupid good weapons in the NFL, right? So this isn't some small thing for Amon-Ra St. Brown to be a top 10 wide receiver, but he is just so efficient and so good at what he does and so much better than any other slot receiver in the league, but also brings explosive plays from the slot, which is hard to do. A lot of slot wide receiver production is like low leverage throws, sitting down in zones, 10, 11, 12-yard completions, and he can do that for sure. But his run after catch ability and his ability to kind of turn on the jets when he gets the ball in his hand, he just like Deebo Samuel that we talked about in the Niners deep dive. He didn't come out and run a 4.40. Hell, I think he ran a 4.6 coming out. But for one reason or another, when the pads come on, the ball gets in his hands, he's just faster than defensive backs, many of which ran in the 4.3s. He's got incredible play strength for a wide receiver, which helps him after the catch to break tackles, but it really helps him at the catch point, where he can box out defenders, he can catch it knowing he's going to get hit, out physical corners with outstretched arms. A 52% contested catch win rate is exceptional given the volume of targets that he gets. And even just his overall route running is better than I ever thought it would be coming out of USC, and frankly better than anybody in the NFL thought it would be, because if they thought it was going to be this good, he wouldn't have gone to the 4th round, right? But yeah, he's just, the guy that keeps the list of the 15 receivers that were drafted ahead of him or whatever. He is the definition of this Lions culture, that, blue collar, chip on his shoulder mentality, first one in, first one out, take the field and just kick people's teeth in. Amon-Ra isn't just the engine of this offense from a schematic point of view, but he very much is from a kind of subjective, intangible point of view as well. So he's phenomenal, and it's really the main reason they're still around the top half in the league for weaponry, where, by the way, they rank 12th to 18th for me, which is very good. I can't stress enough how many amazing groups of weapons there are in the NFL today, and this is more than good enough to get the Lions where they need to go. But as we transition away from Amon-Ra, there are some up arrows here, and there is potential for this to be more of an established top 10 group that could reduce their margin for error a little bit, make them a little bit more bulletproof to any sort of, week or two where St. Brown can't go. And I do think that starts with Jameson Williams, who's been all of the talk of Lions camp. They've really built this in a way where I don't want to say he needs to step up, but they've set it up where they're certainly expecting him to, because there's really no other wide receivers here other than some gadget receivers like Raymond and Williams, Isaiah Williams, that is. But they spent a top 12 pick on Jameson Williams, and he was a hyper-talented, not just super fast receiver coming out of Alabama, but a good route runner at that size. Not amazing ball skills, but certainly good ball skills relative to a guy this fast with his deep threat kind of profile. And in the first 2 years, it's just been a rocky start, and it's all speculation, but I don't know if it's just been injuries holding him back, or he's just not as good as we think, or maybe the culture fit has been a little bit of a square peg, round hole thing here. Never really looked at Jameson Williams as that kneecap-biting, chip on his shoulder type. He's more of that flashy speedster, right? But man, if they could get him to just fit in with this offense and take a step up now as their number 2 wide receiver now that Josh Reynolds is gone, again, the upside conversation on this group of weapons just takes a whole different turn for the better. Because as amazing as Amon-Ra is, he is a slot weapon. He is primarily a short to intermediate player for this team. Only 9 of his 141 receptions came beyond 20 yards down the field. And then your next 2 best weapons are your tight end and your running back. So If teams are forced to respect Jameson Williams as an actual receiver out there, respect him as a deep threat, everything opens up. Not just the passing game for these underneath targets, but the run game as well. Could be a potential game changer. And honestly, I kind of think it's going to happen. Camp reports are just camp reports, and I don't even really look into that too much. But when he's played, it's not like he's been horrible. It's just that they haven't really played him that much. Played about half their snaps last year. A lot of times they're relying on Khalif Raymond to be that guy. Obviously, Josh Reynolds was their number 2 wide receiver last year. It just feels different this year. It feels like they're finally putting that faith in him. And if he can get things on the right track, I mean, Jared Goff does throw one of the prettiest deep balls in the league. They're going to give him time to throw, and you know they're going to give him high leverage targets. So I'll just end it on this. As a Packers fan, I am genuinely terrified of what Jameson Williams could be this year. He is a guy I'm targeting in my fantasy leagues. I can't rank him too high. He just hasn't done that much, but he's definitely a guy I believe in. But then we've kind of hinted at it already. There's not a ton left to say with these wide receivers. You know, Khalif Raymond has had his role in this offense. He's got speed. He can track the deep ball. They've used him in a lot of the ways you would expect them to use Jameson Williams at times. Maybe they'll continue to do that if Jameson Williams can't step up. But it's just not quite the same in terms of dynamism as what you could get with Jameson. But he can operate underneath, short to intermediate as well. But, you know, you got Amon-Ra, you got Laporta. You don't really need Raymond to do that. Just a nice little chess piece in a normal situation, in an ideal situation, he'd be a wide receiver 4. And then that's where I want to talk about Tim Patrick. He's on the practice squad today as of this recording. I bet he's on the roster like next week. I think it's just whenever he's ready with the playbook and all that, they'll get him called up. I mean, he's your Josh Reynolds replacement, right? Because Josh Reynolds replaced him in Denver. It's the same idea. I think Tim Patrick at his best is actually a better player than Josh Reynolds, though. More reliable ball skills. He, though, has had back-to-back seasons with season-ending injuries. I didn't catch a lot of preseason, but from what I saw in Denver, Tim Patrick looked pretty good to me. It was just a very crowded room in Denver. So I actually really like this signing, and I could certainly see, you know, him not having the most like dynamic season or anything like that, but, you know, making some big catches in big spots in big games, like absolutely for Tim Patrick. And, you know, if he can stay healthy, could he have a 700-yard, 6 or 7-yard touchdown season? Yeah, I think so. And it's definitely, in the case of him, it's not too late to go get him in your deeper fantasy leagues. But he'll be up on the team pretty soon. And they also have like Allen Robinson, Donovan Peoples-Jones. They have a pretty deep practice squad right now. I'm sure with just 4 wide receivers on the roster right now, one of these guys is going to get the call up. I'm going to predict that it's Tim Patrick. And then they did, for now, Isaiah Williams made the team. I did watch him at Illinois. Really fun player. I can see why they like him. He's tough, good, like smart overall player. It's just he's 5'9", 185 pounds, and runs slow. So very limited player, but maybe they have some special teams and view him as a backup to like Khalif Raymond maybe. I don't know. But there's your wide receivers. Now, you kind of climb back up the pecking order as we talk about Sam Laporta. I mean, he's going to be their number 2 wide receiver for the most part, or at least number 2 most targeted player. I liked Sam Laporta coming out of Iowa, but I had no idea he was capable of having one of the best rookie tight end seasons of all time and essentially looking like a top 5 tight end heading into year 2. He is so good. Already one of the best route runners at the position. The way he can run two-way goes, snap off his routes, those subtle push-offs to create separation, paired with incredible contested catch ability. Not necessarily in the sense of like, oh, throw him a jump ball, he's going to go moss someone. Contested catch in the sense of like when he does have someone draped all over him, he can so confidently box that guy out, work back to the ball, win at the catch point. He's so good at it. And, you know, on 3rd and 6, Goff just puts a well-thrown ball out in front of Sam Laporta, who maybe created a half step of separation against good tight coverage, and they're still able to convert that thing. Not to mention his speed when they do kind of get him loose on those crossing routes. Like he has big playability from the tight end spot. And as a blocker, you know, he's undersized. He's not a huge people mover or anything like that. That's maybe his his drawback, but he's still pretty good at it. Comes from Iowa. Like, his technique is good. His effort is good. It's just you're going to trade off some of that play strength for all of that he brings as a receiver. So he's fantastic. Again, I know the fantasy analysis is a little late at this point, but I've been taking Sam Laporta in the third rounds of my fantasy draft. Like, I think he's going to be the number one tight end in football this year. He's going to get 1 million targets, super consistent, probably going to catch 10 touchdowns. He's so good. And the end of this story might be at the end of this year is tough, but within the next couple of years, could we be saying Sam Laporta is the best tight end in the league? Yeah, I don't think that's crazy at all. Your tight end depth is Brock Wright and Parker Hess, who are mostly here to block. Brock Wright is a good athlete. He just doesn't really have the overall receiving chops, but he'll make a big play once or twice a year. But then obviously you have Jahmyr Gibbs, and we definitely have more to talk about with Gibbs in the running back breakdown of this, but you do have to acknowledge his dynamism in the receiving game. Even if he's still cleaning some stuff up in terms of drops, pass protection, they were talking about how he's going to be flexed out and be this like Deebo Samuel type and run routes and all that stuff. That part of his game at least isn't there yet, and I still don't even know if it ever will be. I'm not ruling it out either, though. Like, I put the up arrow on him to at least get better at some of this stuff. But teams absolutely have to acknowledge when he's out there, get ready to run, get ready to tackle, because, on a screen or a swing pass or any number of these creative ways that they get him the ball, if you aren't aware of where he is and he breaks into that second level, at least last year, like, that was the best avenue for the Lions to get explosive, like 40-plus yard plays, because they just didn't have that consistent vertical element in their passing game. So, we'll see if Jamison Williams can give them that this year, but that does count. A 60-yard receiving touchdown is the same whether you drop it over the top or you drop it underneath, get a couple blockers in front of Jahmyr Gibbs and let him run the rest of the way. It all counts the same, so he absolutely plays into this ranking. David Montgomery will also be out there. They use these guys at the same time, or if they know they just need good pass protection on a given play, David Montgomery is going to be the guy that's in there. But I do think this split will continue to go more and more towards it's almost exclusively Gibbs on third down. And then you got Craig Reynolds, physical backup, goal line back, and Sione Vaki is a fascinating guy. Running back, safety, hybrid. I really think they've identified him as a special teams kind of ace for them. But when he played running back at Utah, that was probably his best tape, was catching balls out of the backfield. So if Gibbs was gone and they needed some dynamism to catch screens and that kind of stuff, maybe Vaki gets out there and can do some stuff. I think the Lions just fell in love with him as a culture fit and a football player and said, we got to get this guy in the building. I don't care where we put him on the depth chart or how we use him, but he's a Detroit Lion for sure. And I kind of agree. But again, 12th to 18th for weapons in a league loaded with weapons. It's a really good group, and they could absolutely climb that as well. There's upside for this to be closer to like a top 8 group or so. Just got to see some continued growth from Laporta and Gibbs, and ideally get Jamison to actually emerge as a number 2 wide receiver. And I would honestly bet on 2 or 3 of those things happening for Detroit here. But let's talk about the running back here. And heading into this, I originally had Detroit in that tier 6th to 12th. I did put like the ever so slightest bump on this group, not to put them into the tier that ranks 2nd to 5th, basically that competition for who's the second best running back in the league behind Christian McCaffrey. But I did want to note, like, this group is at least something better than Najee and Eckler, James Conner and Trey Benson, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, Breece Hall and nobody else. I do think this duo, even if they don't have like the elite back, the top 5 back, they do have the best duo in the league. So I did want to at least note that. I think Lions fans should be happy ranking 6th at running back. And these guys obviously contribute to a really good ground game in Detroit, including playoffs last year. These guys got 1,000 yards each. And I think this year they definitely have the goal for them both to rush for 1,000 yards, and I think that's very achievable. Because Montgomery did it last year. He's going to be used the exact same way. But Gibbs, it just took them a little bit to really figure out how they should be using him. I think I'm not going to say overthought it, but came out and had this like supervision for Jahmyr Gibbs. And then it turned out like, well, let's just run him on power and outside zone, run him out of the shotgun. He's a really good running back. Like, does he always pick the right hole? Does he have power between the tackles? No, but got plenty of vision, plenty of explosiveness to break tackles from linebackers in the second level. And if we just give him a good hole to run through, he can explode through that gap. So they kind of figured out Jahmyr Gibbs. They didn't kind of figure out. They totally figured out Jahmyr Gibbs. And this balance now heads into next year. I think they got it figured out. And I just love this 1-2 punch, man. David Montgomery probably still underrated, honestly, because of Jahmyr Gibbs' presence here being as fun as he is. But I do think you would feel the drawbacks of Jahmyr Gibbs a lot more if you didn't have David Montgomery here. Because David Montgomery is your vegetables in this offense. He's the guy you want to give the 15 to 20 carries between the tackles to consistently stay ahead of the chains, find those scrappy lanes in the mud to fight through tough tackles and convert first downs, to be your short yardage back, to be out there as a pass protector on third down. He does all of the hard work that Jahmyr Gibbs isn't currently great at and maybe never will be great at. But that's what great teams do, right? They put their players in the best position to succeed. And likewise, you can have a David Montgomery and not be so worried about the fact that, okay, he's not going to necessarily give us the opportunity for explosive runs. Now, he still can't do that. He was tied for 16th for 15-plus yard runs, but he obviously isn't going to have those 60-yard runs that Jahmyr Gibbs can give you. But anybody that thinks Jahmyr Gibbs is going to even get the majority of the carries here, I think you're dead wrong. They love David Montgomery. They had a vision for him. They followed through that vision last year. It had a ton of success within the structure of this offense, and it's going to be more of the same. But then Jahmyr Gibbs does provide that juice and that lightning. And by the way, they will use these guys on the field together quite a bit. That's a big reason why they are currently okay rolling into week one with 4 wide receivers on the roster, because they'll be in 21 personnel a lot, that pony personnel with both these guys out there. And a lot of times that is putting Jahmyr Gibbs out as a wide receiver where they might, motion him pre-snap or just use him flexed out wide. I am curious to see if they have plans to use Gibbs as a actual receiver even more this year. Steal some more of those Christian McCaffrey influences from San Francisco. But yeah, I think you get the point. This is your classic lightning and thunder approach, really to like the best imagination of what that means. And then theoretically speaking, both backups are direct respondents to the guys ahead of him. Craig Reynolds is your tough dude backup. He's fine. He keeps making the team because they love him in that locker room. And then Sione Vaki, he's kind of a gadgety, quick dude. He's not Jahmyr Gibbs, but theoretically could do some of the same stuff. Now, one thing this team is missing is any sort of threat from the quarterback. They don't get any sort of multiplier there towards the run game. It is what it is, but worth noting. And if Hendon Hooker ever were to step in, I do think they would almost certainly tap into his mobility at least somewhat. But that does take us to the offensive line, the best offensive line in the league. This doesn't really need to be a long conversation either, but they rank first in both pass blocking and run blocking. And this, I would say, is really by far the biggest reason, maybe outside of the coaching staff, that the Lions were able to snag this number 2 ranking in this series. This is really one of the most complete, perfect offensive lines I've seen in a while. Because even like those great Eagles offensive lines over the last few years, it's been like either right guard's a question, or we don't know how healthy Lane Johnson is, or, Dickerson was a rookie. Like, you were at least nitpicking one spot that had like a question mark. With Detroit, it's like, okay, your question marks are Glasgow and Zeitler are getting a little old, even though they both had great years last year. And like, I guess Graham Glasgow is like just okay as a pass protector. If you isolate him somehow with your best interior rusher, you can probably get to Jared Goff, but that's like really the only way through these guys. I mean, Taylor Decker at left tackle is super balanced. He's been doing this for so long. He's only 30 years old, a former first-round pick. Great run blocker, great pass blocker. Really not a bad thing to say about him. Somewhere around a top 10 left tackle in the league. I mentioned Glasgow, really complete veteran player, 32 years old. Started his career here, went to Denver, fell off a little bit, came back to Detroit as a backup, had to step in last year, and was a godsend for them because they had some injuries at guard, and he was at least able to stabilize one of those spots. They clearly feel very good about him as a starter, and he wanted to be here. He came back on a 3-year contract this offseason. Again, he's your weak link, but he'd be the best guard on 10 teams in the league and would start for 15 of them, if not more. And even at 32 years old, he is still an ass kicker in the run game with plenty of play strength, super smart player. So he's a left guard. And then center is Frank Ragnow, who is arguably the best center in the league. It's either him or Creed. I'd probably just take the cop out and say it's a tie right now, and we'll see how this year goes. I think Frank's run blocking is even better than Creed's, but Creed's probably a little bit better in pass protection. Splitting hairs there, but I mean, obviously pretty nice to have at worst the second best center in the league, and just such a badass, by the way. He's out there injured in the playoffs, still having like impact blocks. And when he's healthy, I mean, he is just so strong, so tough. He can dig out like legit nose tackles, create push. He's athletic enough to get on the move, a good targeting system. You can do anything you want with him in the run game. And again, as a pass protector, he can take some losses if you're able to isolate him one-on-one, but he's more than good enough in that regard. And then I really like the Kevin Zeitler signing, because if Jonah Jackson were here, even if Jonah's a better run blocker and a better athlete and younger, you would actually be kind of where you were last year, where it's like, okay, the tackles and the centers are awesome, but you can beat these guards. You can't really beat Kevin Zeitler. He's still a phenomenal pass blocker, one of the better pass blocking guards in the league, and still plenty of play strength and grit to be a good run blocker. So you stick him between the best run blocking center and the best run blocking right tackle in the league, and you can live with a slight downgrade from Jonah Jackson as a run blocker. But if he does get isolated more, because you do want to slide towards Graham Glasgow and help him out, you can do that. So I really like that signing. Again, I said that this offensive line was slightly upgraded making that move, even if they didn't have to pay as much to get him. Long term, they're going to need a replacement for these two guys, but as they're sitting right now, this is awesome. But then at right tackle, you have Penei Sewell, one of the, let's just play it safe and say top 5 tackles in the league. There's a lot of great tackles in the NFL right now. But I do want to take a little something I said back, in the Niners deep dive. I said Trent Williams was 2 tiers higher than anybody in the league as a run blocker. I did forget about Penei Sewell taking that leap last year. I think Trent is still a tier higher than Penei Sewell, but Penei Sewell would be in tier 2 alone with himself. And he is definitely the closest thing to what the Niners get from Trent Williams. This dude is so insanely strong and crazy athletic given how strong he is. Talk about being able to ask him to do anything in the run game. If you need him to clear out a big defensive end, whether it's inside or out, he can do it. If you want to pull him on a toss, detonate a linebacker, erase him from the play, he can do that. You want him to work on a combo block with the undersized Sam Laporta, he's got more than enough play strength to compensate for a lighter tight end that's going to work with him. He's just so special there, and he's only getting better in pass protection too. That's the scary thing. Like, I don't know how much better he can get as a run blocker. He was damn near perfect as a prospect in that regard coming out of Oregon. He's been great at it, and now elite at it last year from a run blocking perspective. But as a pass blocker, like, his efficiency just keeps going up and up and up, which, 24 years old, that tends to happen for great players. So even if his development stops, you're damn happy with what he's at. They've already reached a contract extension on him before his fourth season. Speaks volumes about how good he is and how much they believe in him. So even if he is what he is now, he will return dividends on that contract. But if 2 years we're looking back and Trent Williams is either regressing or retired and we say Penei Sewell's the best tackle in the league, shouldn't surprise anybody. So those are your starting five. Again, damn near perfect. I will say they are thin. They don't have the depth that you would hope for. And if they do start to suffer injuries, this could start to fall apart. I mean, their backup tackles are Dan Skipper, who's been around here, but it's not like he's played great when he's been in. Kind of an awkward, lengthy player. Colby Sorsdahl was a fifth-round pick last year who started at guard. He's going to kick back to tackle, it seems, at least based on their depth chart. And then they have the completely developmental Giovanni Manu. I do think Manu 3 years from now could be a Taylor Decker replacement. Like, I do believe in this team's ability to identify talent and develop players at this position, but he's just so raw, new to football. Hard to really expect anything from him in year one, but in time, definitely a name I'm interested in. They gave up like a future third to come back into the draft and spend a fourth-round pick on him, knowing that they basically would have to burn a 53-man roster spot on him all year to keep him around, because if they practice squatted him, someone would almost certainly offer him money to join their team. So it was an aggressive move to go get him, but this team has earned the benefit of the doubt when they get aggressive in the draft that it's going to work out. So definitely interested to see where that goes, but again, year one would be a surprise if he's an impact. And then the guard depth is brutal. I mean, Coyote Awosika played last year, good run blocker, but a turnstile as a pass blocker. And then they did spend a day 3 pick on Christian Mahogany, who I really liked, but did have injury concerns, and he's already on the non-football injury list. So we'll see how long that lasts. I do like him and think he could even be a starter and a replacement for Kevin Zeitler as early as next year, but the injury is obviously concerning there. So again, the depth is not quite where you'd want it to be for Detroit, and playing with fire a little bit in terms of only 3 or 4 teams a year get through the year without an offensive line injury. It is incredibly likely that they're going to have to turn to this depth at some point, and when that happens, they don't have great answers. But to wrap up the offense, they do come out as my second overall offense. Just love the construction of this team. Really hard to find holes in this group. They're third for passing game, third for run game, essentially all rainbows and butterflies, and there's even room for this to go up if you get some steps forward from the weapons. But let's talk about this defense that to this point in time hasn't necessarily been able to hold up their end of the bargain to support what this team has accomplished offensively. They're hoping to take that leap this year. Let's see what this roster looks like and if they can do that. We'll start with the defensive line. I definitely think this group is ready for a big year. They are, again, rolling the dice a little bit here. This team is not afraid to gamble, whether it's fourth down or hitting the sports books if you're Jameson Williams, but they definitely gambled with the durability risks on this defensive line. A little bit with DJ Reader, but especially with Marcus Davenport. We'll get there, but they do come out as my 13th ranked pass rush, really with the main note there being they would have been in the tier that goes 9 through 13, but they did get pinged down a little bit because of the injury risks to put them at the bottom of that tier, really clearly alone at 13th. But they do have tied for the best D-line run defense in the league. I saw some Lions fans when we did the Ravens episode. They're like, how are the Lions not the best D-line run defense in the league? And they always have been. I just am an idiot and forgot to put the 1 through 3 on the Ravens episode I just did first. But 10th for overall defensive line. It's a really good group, if not risky with the injuries. So Aiden Hutchinson established himself as a true number one last year. We kind of wondered in last year's deep dive when and if that was going to come, or if he was a guy that was more going to settle in as like a high end two. Well, Aiden said, F that. Like, I'm not just shattering the thought that I could maybe only be a high end two. I'm going to push high end one as early as year two, keep getting even better as the year goes on. And man, I think if Hutch repeats what he did last year, this is like the same thing we said about Josh Allen in Jacksonville. It's like, if I see one more year of what he did last year, I will put Aiden Hutchinson into that elite tier, the elite of the elite, really, with TJ Watt and Bosa, Micah Parsons. I mean, this dude's insane. And if you haven't catch Brett Coleman's video on Aiden Hutchinson, it's incredible. Like, I'm doing you a disservice wasting your time talking about Hutch now when you can just go watch that, preferably when you're done watching this video. But just Brett did such a good job, and we love Brett. He came on to represent the Texans in this series, but he highlights how powerful he is and how good he is at countering off of the power, knowing when he's got you, how to get that leverage and get off the block at the right moment, building his pass rush plan off of that, and then just stemming all of these, the spin move, the swims, the speed to bend. He just has the whole package. And frankly, it is that power element that I didn't quite think was going to get there with him coming out of Michigan. Not that he didn't have a power rush, but I just didn't know that he really had the ability to fully fill out. But I think that's a testament to his work ethic. Like, he to me takes care of his body, is in the gym every day. I do think he's turned into a stronger player than he was at Michigan in a way that a lot of these top drafted players don't continue to develop. And he was a fourth-year player coming out of Michigan too, but he's just continued to add that play strength, and it's made a world of difference, because it's one thing to just be a super crafty, high IQ, quick rusher like he was at Michigan. It's another thing to have the fear of that power and then all of the compliments off of it. I mean, that's what makes him TJ Watt, really. So if he repeats what he did last year, really, I'm there. I mean, I would make a pretty strong case he is the first guy outside of that top tier currently. And believe me, Lions fans, that is not a diss. I'm saying I would take this guy over Rashawn Gary, Josh Hines Allen, Montez Sweat, Daniil Hunter, like all of these true number ones that are outside of that one of one tier. But with the tape he put up, the production he put up, not going to take much longer for me to have him take that one last final step. And really, he's very much in the defensive player of the year running this year based on what he showed us last year, and that he's not necessarily done getting better either. Like, this dude has absurd drive to be, a Hall of Fame type of talent, and I would bet on him to do that really at this point. So to be able to build this rush around him is amazing. But then you do kind of somewhat get into question mark territory relatively quickly. And I like Aleem McNeil a lot. Ultimately, I think he's good enough to be your second best rusher. I think my questions here more are like the health risks and everybody else. But even if you're saying Aleem McNeil has to be a number two, he's probably one of the lower end number two rushers in the league. Now, as a run defense, I have no questions. He's awesome in that phase. He's lost weight since he came into the league. They've asked him to get a little bit more of a pass rushing profile than he had coming out, where he was more of a nose tackle coming out. But that background to play the run as a nose clearly shows he's great at getting off blocks. The added foot quickness makes him a complete handful in that phase. But yeah, as a rusher, again, it's like, I believe in him. I think he is still getting better and can live up to being a player that in an ideal situation is a number two rusher. But played 13 games last year, missed a little bit of time. Not that I'm holding that against him, but 34 pressures, 5 sacks in 13 games. Really turned it on in the playoffs. So if you include the playoffs, that puts him at 16 games played, closer to a full season, 43 pressures, 6 sacks, which puts him 73rd in the league for total pressures. So From a production standpoint, it's like, yeah, he's probably actually outside of what you would consider to be a number 2 piece for your pass rush. But I will say, because the lack of anybody else here, I do think he draws a lot of attention, and he's still getting better. So I'm probably leaning on the side of positivity to say that Alim McNeill can be a 2, and ranking him out as a stud tier player, an 81 pass rush grade. That is probably giving him a little bit of benefit of the doubt. But I do believe in the tape, like he is a very complete player. We already talked about the run defense, but his athleticism is special. He has finesse moves, but he also has power. Still kind of new at this too, because they really just asked him to plug gaps in college. So I like McNeill a lot. Like I said, the majority of my questions here start now. Not so much with DJ Reader. Like, I don't have questions about who DJ Reader is when he plays. And again, the Lions are tied for first for D-line run defense. So that is DJ Reader coming in here making a huge difference there. Like, this dude as a nose tackle is one of the best in the league against the run. His play strength is absurd. He can legit take on double teams and dispose of them and continue to make plays. He doesn't go backwards. If you try to run into his gap, and do not leave this guy one-on-one, because you just can't block this dude one-on-one, he's going to be a monster. So I think that is very well reflected here. As a rusher, he is a good penetrator. He's a good player. He gets the same rush grade as Alim McNeill. Not necessarily a guy that's going to like get off a ton of blocks and have a lot of sack production, but he will start to open some things up for these other guys. He is an absolute load, and he's probably going to get a lot of one-on-one opportunities to be that penetrator, or he will demand a double team because he's too big and too strong, and that will open things up for Liam McNeill. And I maybe even jumped the gun a little bit to say that the question marks have started, because I love DJ Reader. And just like we said with Jamison Williams, as a Packers fan, I saw DJ Reader signed with Detroit, and I was like, fuck, that sucks for us. He's so good. So don't get me wrong. I love the signing, love the impact he has on this team, but he was available for a reason. He's missed a lot of time. I believe it was his second torn bicep in his career. He's played about 50% of his team snaps the last couple of years, and that's about the average on his career. So there's questions of, can he stay healthy? And then you are almost certainly not going to be able to ask DJ Reader to play 80% of the snaps. It'll probably be a lot closer to 50-50 with the rest of the depth here. So I probably worded that poorly, and I apologize. Like, I love DJ Reader. It's just, he looks really good on this graphic right now, and you might even look at the D-line rankings and be like, shouldn't it be a little bit higher? Like, DJ Reader's a freaking phenomenal signing. But I think as a projection, you have to also, fade him out and put Levi Awuzie-Wanarike and Mekhi Wingo in there for a lot more snaps than you might think. And that's where I definitely have some worries. And we might as well discuss them before we get to that other edge spot. Levi Awuzie-Wanarike, I understand he's getting some camp hype. They're talking him up. It's kind of what they do in Detroit. They talk up their dudes. Not saying they don't get the benefit of doing that, but in the case of Awuzie-Wanarike, it's not the first time that that's happened. This is year 4 for him, a second-round pick, and he's done nothing for this team. I didn't even really love him as a prospect. I thought his play strength was pretty poor. Didn't really see the power profile as a rusher. Didn't see the anchor as a run defender. Had some rush moves. Not that he was like a horrible pick or anything, but I don't know, man. Even when he's played, he hasn't been anything really special. He showed some flashes as a rusher last year. He did have 10 pressures on 100 pass rush snaps. But that's the thing. 4 years, he's played 560 snaps. So can he stay healthy? And when he is healthy, is he even any use to you? And I definitely think some of the negativity that came off when I started talking about DJ Reader is heavily correlated to how much I think they need another defensive tackle to step up here. Awuzie-Wanarike is a huge factor that they're counting on here in many ways. And that's not a piece that I would be willing to bet on if I'm Detroit. And unfortunately, because of some injuries to these other guys, they've had to count on him even more. John Kaminsky is out for the majority of the season. Broderick Martin, I don't know his whole deal, but he's on IR designated for return. So he's going to miss, I think, at least 6 weeks. a third-round pick nose tackle from last year that's very unproven. And Mekhi Wingo is a fun player, but he is not a run defender. He is a 285-pound situational gap splitter for your pass rushing packages. So we'll see how this goes, man. I think it's pretty stubborn of Detroit to just say, okay, DJ Reader, you're going to play 80% of the snaps. There's a lot of upside if they do that, but is it worth doing that in week 2, 3, 4, 5, given the probability that he's going to get hurt again? He feels much closer to me to a guy that's like where Mike Williams is in with the Jets, where it's like, we'll use you when you're healthy. We don't necessarily need you. We want you, but our priority is making sure you're healthy in January. And I don't know that they've put themselves in the best spot to ensure that that happens. So that to me is kind of the main piece on this team that is kind of a house of cards built on wooden stilts, if you will. And honestly, with the edge group, some of these questions continue to come as well, which is not great. I like Marcus Davenport. I've always been a fan of his game. He, when healthy, has a great bull rush, a great first step, freaky traits, right? Like the Saints, once upon a time, under this very Saints-inspired regime, like they're very familiar with Davenport. They traded a pair of first-round picks to go up and get him. And early in his career, he looked like he was taking those strides to maybe be something like a Rashawn Gary, a Montez Sweat with that lengthy bull rushing profile. And he has some snaps, man, like in his prime, like he gets that Madden animation where he gets under your pads and he just lifts you like a forklift and puts you on your ass. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of Marcus Davenport, and he uses that length and strength to stop the run. But, like, he was available for $3 million for a reason. On his career, this includes when he was in his prime, on his career, he has, on average, played 38% of available snaps. Last year, this was already a question for the Vikings, was how much are they going to get from Marcus Davenport? He got a 1-year, $11 million prove-it deal. He played 10% of their snaps last year. So I'm not saying this was a bad signing. I'm all about the risk, and if he stays healthy, and if DJ Reader stays healthy, this could be a top 3 to 4 defensive line in the league. I recognize that, but he especially is one of these guys where it's like you can't just imagine him being here the entire season if you're projecting this defensive line. That is very improbable. So I'm trying to factor that in the best I can. But if this is anything like Davenport the last couple of years, you're going to very quickly be looking at your edge depth needing to step into a starting role for them. And that, for the Lions, is Josh Paschal, who I would say has been what he was as a prospect, a smashing, big-bodied edge that defends the run without much of a pass-rushing profile. And I like Josh Paschal as a 5-tech, definitely contributes to this number 1 ranked D-line run defense. Him as someone that can play a lot of early down snaps to hopefully keep Marcus Davenport healthy makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't even be surprised if Paschal outsnaps Marcus Davenport, and they do look at Davenport as a guy that's just, coming in for pass rushing downs. But again, you're just not getting too much from him as a pass rusher if he has to be more of a full-time starter. And that would be really where James Houston comes into play here. James Houston had a really exciting rookie season. This was looking like an absolute gem of a find out of Jackson State, an undersized 6'1", 248-pound speed rusher with just speed, bend, and inside spin move to counter. Really fun player, and I even have the arrow pointing up on him, but he did miss all of last season essentially for an ankle injury. He tried to get back late in the year and played like 11 snaps in a playoff game, but basically lost his sophomore season and kind of has to recapture that hype. If Davenport's gone, Paschal as an early down guy with Houston coming in on pass rush downs does make sense. It's just, are the two of them together going to give you quality number 2 edge play? Probably not. So it's a very uniquely crafted defensive line, rolling the dice with some injury risk and lack of depth, frankly. Now, I do want to give Kaminsky just a minute here because he theoretically could be here for the playoffs or into December. Really nice hybrid player. he could compensate for some of your interior lack of depth, some of your lack of edge depth. Balanced, like he can play anything from he could probably play 3-tech, but he normally will play like 4 head up on the tackle, inside the tackle or outside the tackle. He's kind of like an interior end hybrid, and he can rush, he can defend the run. He's just a very nice balanced player. He was a loss for this team. But let's move on. Let's talk about the linebackers here. There's a lot of names to bring up here. Everybody kind of plays a little bit other than Alex Anzalone, who stays on the field for all 3 downs. It's an okay linebacker room. They rank 19th to 20th for me. C grade in coverage, 21st to 25th. B- grade for run defense, 12th to 20th. But Anzalone is your LB1. Nice balanced player, man. They really like him. He's got the size. He's got decent speed. He brings that leadership they're looking for. You wish his tackling consistency was a little better. That's definitely the main knock on him, is he missed 16% of his tackles last year. And that's been the book on him for a while now. But a heady coverage player. He's got length and like decent speed and range. Like he's just a good overall player, kind of average as a number 1 linebacker. So it makes sense why he kind of stays on the field. And then it's kind of a 2 to 2.5 player rotation as the next guy in. Jack Campbell, the first round pick last year, is going to get the most snaps here, not just because of the draft pedigree, but because first and second down, they want him out there. He's got the size, the crazy high-end run defender that he was at Iowa. I think that translated. Like his IQ against the run, playing in that Iowa defense that demands that discipline, his nastiness and really quickness in the trenches for such a big guy with his length. Very nice tackler. But the thing is, like, he just is not a speedy, rangy coverage player. And he was really getting cooked in coverage last year to the point that they didn't even really use him on third downs. And on early downs, he was a kind of an issue against play action because he really is tall and struggles to turn and run against like play action crossers and stuff. So, kind of a one-way linebacker right now. He could continue to emerge as one of the best run-defending linebackers in the league and maybe be something like what Bobby Wagner is right now for the Commanders. Like, okay, I wasn't the biggest fan of that pick in the first round. He's been the great run defender that you thought he would be, but if he never turns into a good coverage player just because of physical limitations, you're probably not going to be too thrilled with him as returning first-round dividends, top 20 first-round dividends, but definitely contributes to the run defense. And then they'll probably continue to take him off on third downs as they did last year. They have a pair of other linebackers that they like, starting with Derek Barnes, who I do want to rewind just a second to the defensive line. I forgot to talk about this, but if Davenport does go down, I do think Derek Barnes would probably have to play some emergency on-ball run-defending edge on early downs. That's what he was at Purdue. He played edge and has been learning linebacker here in Detroit, but I don't think that's really the vision for Derek Barnes. Barnes is a nice player, man, and this was another reason I didn't love the Jack Campbell pick, because I was like, Derek Barnes seems like he's trending up. We still got to talk about Malcolm Rodriguez, but Barnes he's super athletic, man, and you can tell that things are starting to click for him. Like, he's been a pretty good run defender over the last couple of years when he's played. And the coverage stuff, he still has his losses. He's still a little tighter. He is a converted end. So, he's not the most fluid mover out in space. But some of his plays moving in zone, making plays on balls. He had that game-winning interception on Baker Mayfield that was really nice in zone coverage. He has some of that range with the speed, and that, blitzing, pass rushing background is really useful. With the Saints kind of influence here, he actually reminds me a ton of Caden Ellis, who played a lot as the third linebacker, played a little on-ball edge stuff, blitzed a little, moved around, rotated in as a coverage guy, hit free agency after being an LB3, and then really hit the ground running with a new team. Derek Barnes heading into his contract year, I think that could very well happen here. But a nice player for the Lions to have. And I think he will continue to take snaps away from Jack Campbell, as will Malcolm Rodriguez, because Rodriguez is the guy with the speed, the fluid hips, the agility, the man-to-man coverage skills. They will, I think, continue to use him either as a third down coverage linebacker, or if they want to go more of a base 4-3, putting Brian Branch back there as safety, taking the slot corner off the field, and then have kind of that backside linebacker that just has that crazy pursuit speed from the backside where they don't have to worry so much about taking on blocks. I think Rodriguez will continue to play in some of those formations for them too. So he's had tackling issues. His lack of size, I do think, has been a little bit of a roadblock in his development to get even better. He had a great rookie season. They very quickly replaced him, but incredible depth to have. Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Ben Neiman, two veterans that have played. I'm honestly a little surprised that they're keeping this many linebackers, but I do think they understand, like, mixing some of these guys in for a drive or two isn't the end of the world to keep these guys fresh, kind of like a running back. And both Neiman and Reeves-Maybin you can put out there and feel okay about for a drive. And then even this Trevor Nowaski makes the team, presumably for special teams needs. But a very deep linebacker room without really any major impact players. I think Jack Campbell could continue to prove himself out as more of a star run defender in the league and be an impact in that regard. But I still don't know that he's quite there yet. It's just really hard for young linebackers at this position, as good as he was coming out. So pretty average with the linebackers. But if that's going to be their worst group, as we've talked about in this series, linebacker is kind of the running back of the defense. I think they'll be just fine. And their floor is pretty nice with all those different bodies and skill sets. Secondary. This is a big talking point for the Lions here, right? What is this new look secondary gonna look like? For me, they come in that cluster of like good to solid secondaries that do have some questions, kind of right on the cusp though of top 10, where if a couple things go right, they'll break into that impact group of top 10 secondaries, which is 10 to 18th in the league. So they are hoping to have a legit number one corner now in Carlton Davis. Just made so much sense when they acquired him, right? They want to be able to play physical press man coverage. These guys saw a lot of Carlton Davis when they were in New Orleans in that division. Completely fits what they want to do. Raises the floor when he's out there. They can feel much better blitzing or leaving him on an island. He doesn't have crazy speed. He's not the most like elite overall coverage player, but he's very good. I would say a low-end number one, and was just overall a great addition. The only downside to him is he is another player here that comes with a little bit of injury risk. I'm not going to say that's the only reason he was available. I do think Tampa had to make some cuts with the cap, but he has been a guy that historically misses 4 to 6 games a year. And they've done a good job, as we'll see here, to be ready for those 4 to 6 games. But he's not a guy that you're like, oh God, he's at risk to, tear his third ACL or whatever and miss the whole season. So not too worried about it there, especially when they have much better depth with this group as opposed to like the defensive line that we talked about. And then they spent a first round pick on Terrion Arnold. Again, just made so much sense. We talk about this team having an identity, the types of players they want. That's Terrion Arnold. He is that chip on his shoulder type of player. He is scrappy overall. Now, I'm not going to say he's the best like press man-to-man corner. I actually liked him a little bit better playing off as an instinctive guy with really good acceleration to kind of play from zone, jump routes. Not that he can't go man-to-man, and he does have really fluid, oily hips, but I do think his technique, his sort of reaction time when he's on the trail, when that receiver snaps off his route, was he super quick to physically and mentally respond and close that space with that snappy route squeeze in man-to-man. I don't think it was a weakness, but it certainly wasn't like what Quinyon Mitchell had or even Nate Wiggins. So ultimately, like, I thought this was a good pick, not like an, oh my God, great pick. A lot of people had Terrion Arnold as like a top 12 to 15 player in this draft and said this was a complete steal. They traded up to get him. That's about where I thought he would go. So would I be that surprised if a late first round rookie had some ups and downs? No. Not at all. Do I think he's better than what they had as CB2 last year? Yes, absolutely. But he is certainly some bit of a wild card for this for this secondary because we don't know quite what the floor is going to look like as a rookie, and we don't quite know what the ceiling is going to look like either. He could be a freaking baller and a defensive rookie of the year. Sometimes these guys surprise, right? So there's Terrion Arnold, looks locked and loaded as CB2. And then we got to talk about Brian Branch. And Brian Branch, to me, is the best slot corner in the NFL already in year 2. And Lions fans can get all tied up in a knot about this because they're like, he's a safety. And I'm like, well, that's not what he was last year. That's not what he was at Alabama. And from week 14 on last year, he took 5 snaps as a registered safety. But I just want to start this by saying, as a slot corner, I think you make a case he is already the best cover slot. Like, you talk about what we talk about with Terrion Arnold, like that stickiness on the trail, the reaction time when a guy begins his route break, does he process that information mentally and physically, stay right attached to him, that quick, sticky route squeeze, great zone IQ for a young player. He doesn't have the long speed, but he's got all the acceleration, hip fluidity, foot speed you're looking for. And then as a run defender, he's already right up there with like Mike Hilton, any of the best run defending slots in the league. So I want to give him his flowers for just how good he is as a slot. But there's more to talk about here because they are talking about moving him to safety. And only time will tell kind of how this plays out. If you look at the Lions depth chart right now, like their team depth chart, they have Brian Branch just listed as the safety, and they have Amik Robertson listed as the dime corner. We'll continue to talk about Amik Robertson, but to me, that's a mistake. If that's how they're going to operate, is when they get a nickel, it's Brian Branch 12 yards away from the defense, not playing slot corner, and Amik Robertson, who's 185 pounds, playing what Brian Branch did last year. Now, I think this is a smart team. I don't think that's what they mean when they list that. But if that is what they're doing, I'm going to be critical of it. Because as a Packers fan, the idea of Brian Branch playing 10 yards off the ball is a blessing. Because he is an absolute game wrecker as a slot player. And I think that is what he was built to play. But what I think the Lions are saying is we do want to run-based defense. Because that's who we are. We want to shut down the run. And when we are in base, we shouldn't be taking Brian Branch off the field. And in that situation, he's going to be their strong safety, which is still a bit of a slot corner role as long as Kirby Joseph is the free safety and they're playing single high. They might have him playing a little bit more like cover 2, cover 4 out of base, like occasionally. But the second they get into nickel, which is still going to be 65% of the time at least in Detroit, Brian Branch should be resuming that slot corner role, and Ifeatu Melifonwu should be the other safety. So I am curious to see, like, because I've tried to stay up to this, but I haven't watched every camp or every preseason snap to see how this is playing out. That's what I imagine because that is how they should do this. I will be very critical if they're playing him as an off safety because I just don't think you can make the impact on the games that Brian Branch made as a slot corner last year playing deep. And not just from a coverage perspective, but especially as a run defender. Like, I think that would actually be a legitimate hit to their run defense without Brian Branch and the flexibility he provides there out of nickel personnel. And I promise you that is not a diss to Brian Branch. Like, as a Packers fan, please play Brian Branch as a safety all year. You'd be doing us a favor. So, going to be very interesting to monitor. I think they'll handle it right, though. Let's keep going, though, and talk about the rest of the defensive backs here. So you have Kirby Joseph is the free safety. He's the guy with the playmaking instincts on the back end, the range, the speed. Had a bit of a down year last year. He had some nice interceptions still, but I think did miss some tackles coming downfield that he didn't in his rookie year. And, gave up some more big plays on the back end. So I still think he's, the arrow was pointing up, but he didn't take that big leap last year. Certainly, maybe took a step back before he maybe takes 2 steps forward this year. But I do like him. He's a really good player. He's still only 20, is he even 24 yet? He's in year 3. Plenty of reason to believe he can be like a very good overall safety. And then Ifeatu Melifonwu is exciting, man. It's another reason why Brian Branch should be playing from the slot because this just makes a lot more sense. If you got Kirby's your free safety, Melifonwu's that strong safety, that lurker, the guy that can man up tight ends, play those intermediate zones. He's got enough speed as a converted corner. He's got enough speed to play the deep half. Can even rotate him single high if you want. But I didn't like him as a corner. He had a lot of draft hype. I just thought he was too stiff to play that position. But as a safety, he just makes so much sense. He has instincts. He's very physical. Wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he has kind of a breakout year, kind of like a supercharged Talanoa Hufanga maybe, because he is in a position to make plays, kind of lurking over the middle of the field and stuff. So I really like him. Again, I'm pretty sure this is how it's going to play out. And their 5 leading snap getters in the secondary will be the 5 guys we just talked about. But if you look at the Lions depth chart, they do list Branch as the starting safety, Amik Robertson as the starting nickel corner, and Ifeatu Melifonwu as a backup safety. For me, Robertson is certainly nothing more than a dime corner. And that's fine. That's a fine role for Robertson. He's a good playmaker. He's got great athleticism, but he's tiny, has had a lot of coverage inconsistency. And especially if you're talking about making him a nickel corner, he can't hold up there. He cannot take on blocks like Brian Branch does. He's not the consistent tackler that Brian Branch is, who's, by the way, like one of the most crazy consistent tacklers I've ever seen for a defensive back. So, fine enough for what he is. We'll see what kind of role they put him in. I'm a little bit concerned with how they're listing it. Excited to see how that goes. But then you do have depth. You have second-round pick Ennis Rakestraw, who is very similar to Terrion Arnold, where he's not the fastest guy, but really scrappy, really physical, very much in that Lions mold of what they want for this secondary. And Rakestraw, I would say, actually probably had a little bit better technique and reaction time in man-to-man coverage, but he's not quite as quick as Terrion Arnold. But my pro comp on Rakestraw was Roger McCreary, who went in the second round. I think he's a really high floor player. And I think he can play in the slot if someone gets hurt. He can play outside if someone gets hurt. Very nice depth to have. Not going to sit here and say he's like going to be a future superstar or anything like that, but was a nice pick. Kindle Vildor had to play last year. He's a backup. He'll get picked on for sure, as he did last year. And then you got Khalil Dorsey makes this team again. Those two guys are kind of hanging on to that job until Emmanuel Moseley gets back. We'll see if and when that is. Mosley's been hurt like 3 straight years, but when Moseley plays, he's a starting caliber player. There might be a 5% world where Arnold is actually struggling a little bit in his rookie year. Moseley comes back healthy and they're more comfortable with Moseley out there, and they just kind of kick these rookies into year 2 if everybody's healthy. I'm certainly not projecting that to be the case, but I'm just saying there's an outcome maybe where that happens. There's also an outcome where Arnold's playing great. Rakestraw's just fine as a backup. They got Robertson. Moseley comes back healthy, and instead of activating him, they just release him. And he signs somewhere else. Or he just never gets healthy. So that's Moseley. And then you do also have Brandon Jones as another safety on this roster. Had a lot of hype coming out. Transferred from Northwestern and Notre Dame. Just not a rangy athlete, but a smart player. Makes this team here in year 2. I'd be interested to see what he has to offer. I think he has a nice high floor as a backup in the league. Then I'm not familiar with Lawrence Strickland, who made this team out of, I think, Ball State. But it's a fun secondary. Definitely has top 10 potential with all these young players, a lot of up arrows. And there's also some sort of quote-unquote potential if Carlton Davis can stay healthy for the whole year too, because I think I factor in the fact that he is likely to miss some time. But as we wrap up this whole defense, they do come out as my 5th ranked defense because they are my number 1 ranked run defense. That is a feather in their cap, an identity of this team where if you're going to beat us, it's going to be coming on 3rd and 8, like consistently. And last year, teams were able to beat them fairly consistently on 3rd and 8. It didn't hold their team back. But this year, they're hoping with the improvements in the secondary, some added pieces with the pass rush, taking a little pressure off of McNeil and Hutchinson, that their pass defense can at least be above average. If they're getting stops, on 1 out of 3 tough third downs. Maybe they turn it into 50% of their tough third downs. Might not sound like much, but that can be a world of difference and be the difference between them losing a tough game to the Niners in the conference championship and winning the Super Bowl. So I think their approach has been right. They've taken some gambles. There's a ton of upside with those gambles. There's a little more downside with this defense than we're listing here as well because of some of the injury concerns. But 5th for my overall defense this year, I do project them to take that leap on this side of the ball that they need. But let's talk a little special teams real quick. Their kicker did go down, Michael Badgley, so they're going to have to lean on very much unproven Jake Bates, a year 2 undrafted player. Wasn't really sure how to play this for the grading system that we have. I just plugged in a kind of baseline 60.0 kicker grade, which is like we're using PFF grades. That's like the bare minimum. So this is definitely their special teams ranked at their floor because that is good for 32nd among kickers. But that's about where they were last year, that 20th in special teams. That was also with Michael Badgley missing a third of the season. They were 15th in PFF team grade, 18th in DVOA. So they do have questions here with that kicker. And with all these top teams, you're looking for, any areas of weakness. And if you're in a tight game against the Niners, is this like the Packers last year or the Bills where that missed kick costs you a big game? It's certainly on the radar, at least for the Lions. They would certainly do themselves a service if they can finish games with their run game, finish games with touchdowns, game-winning interceptions, taking the ball away. Don't put the game in the hands of their kicker or feet of their kicker. But as we continue to wrap everything up here with my splits of strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors, we'll start with the pivotal factors because that is where I list the kicker. There's no guarantee that Jake Bates sucks. He could be good. And then special teams isn't too much of a worry. But the health on the defensive line, we talked about it to death at this point, but I do think it's a huge deal for this Lions team. If Davenport continues to get hurt as he's done, and if DJ Reader can't stay healthy, I think it would be very hard for this defense to live up to the 5th ranking that I have on them. But if those guys are healthy, that pass rush is like top 5. And this defense could be maybe even a little bit better. So it's a wild card for that reason. Could go left, could go right. Jamison Williams, a huge wild card. I'm not going to say they need him, but if he steps up, this is a top 8 or so group of weapons. If he can be that premium deep threat, and that's just going to reduce their margin for error offensively, score more points. Don't put the ball in the hands of their defense and their special teams quite as much if they're winning by 14 instead of 7 because they got that big 60-yard touchdown off of play action. Stuff all adds up. And then obviously the secondary, really across the board. You have 4 young players whose arrows are pointing up. You feel very safe about Brian Branch, but even him, it's like, what does a new role look like for him? Is he able to make the same impact he did last year if they're using him more as a safety? Again, I don't think they're going to do that in a way that hurts them, but it's something to keep an eye on. And then Carlton Davis and his health. So just a lot of question marks still with the secondary, even if the upside as well is there for this to be a top 10 awesome secondary. Likewise, could go more towards being a strength, could go a little more towards being a weakness. As far as their strengths are concerned, I'll just read them off. Offensive line, running back, offensive coaching, overall run defense, and an elite overall culture. And then their weaknesses are like very minor. You're kind of searching to find weaknesses here with this Lions team. Even if they have some questions, their overall floor is phenomenal. But I do think the linebacker coverage, that area of the defense, is weak. And then O-line depth, if they get some injuries on the O-line, they aren't as equipped as some other teams to put in backups and play at a decent level. And then the wide receiver depth. It is a very Amon-Ra St. Brown centered group of receivers right now. But let's wrap up by taking at the Lions' schedule and their over-under. And, we're a day removed from my predictions show where you'll actually see where my final predictions come in. This is more of like, here's their schedule. This is the kind of TFG win total projection for the Lions. And my math says 10.5 wins where Vegas has them is accurate. That is the probable line for them. They don't have an easy schedule necessarily. They have a tough division. They have to play a first place schedule. They play the NFC West and the AFC South. So there's definitely some good games on the schedule. But this is my number 2 ranked football team. As long as they take care of business, they're going to be favored in every single game with the exception of at San Francisco week 17. And I actually personally like the over on this team. I just think this team is still only trending up. They've earned the benefit of the doubt. They're a damn good team as is. So I think they can get to 11 or 12 wins with this schedule. 12-1 to win the Super Bowl for my number 2 ranked team. That's the 4th best odds for the Super Bowl. I like that. I've made that bet myself, by the way. 12-1 for the Lions to win the Super Bowl. $10 to win 120. I absolutely think that. And division odds, even at plus 125 to win this division, the Packers are tough, but I think there's some value there. I think that's saying there's a less than 50% chance that the Lions win this division. I think there's at least a 50% chance, if not a 60 or 65% chance. So I see a lot of value with them on the market this year. Lions fans, it's good to be back. I know we took a hiccup last year after the draft. I was a little lower on them coming in. It wasn't just a hiccup. You thought I hated you. It genuinely feels good to be back in the Lions train. I don't know if I'm welcome or not. I know I had some hater moments last year, whatever, but I did spend 2 years hyping this team up since Dan Campbell got here, so let's not forget about that. I'm in on the 2024 Lions, ranking them number 2. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Am I now too high on the Lions? And I got some time to think about this with the predictions show coming out in a couple days. Tomorrow, really, as of you watching this. I've got a decision to make if I really want to put my money where my mouth is on my prediction and put the Lions into the Super Bowl as right now ranking as my number 2 team. That's obviously where I've got them at heading into week 1. So we'll see there. Thank you so much, you guys, for watching. We got one more of these to go, so we'll see you very soon. Until then, peace out.